Hey everyone, this is Fran from the 5-Minute Modeler. Join me on my model railroad journey where I continue to build out my model railroad and provide trains in action, tips and tricks on how to make more out of your time and money. The Mackinaw City rail docks are starting to really come together. Thank you to all who commented and made recommendations on how to handle the water-land difference. I took away some great ideas that helped me formulate a great solution. I'll also go over putting down a base color of the land areas as well as laying out the track. Stick around to the end and I'll be discussing some new elements I'll be adding. So let's jump right in. So at the end of the last episode, we used a drywall plaster to coat the bare foam. Now we're ready to paint this base color kind of a grayish tan, as I mentioned in the last episode. It's mostly going to be covered by track, ballast, and ground cover, but it does give us something to start with. I begin by using 3 colors of acrylic paint. I use titanium white, ivory black, and burnt umber. By mixing these 3 together, I can get various shades for the ground. I begin by squeezing out a fair amount of white paint, then a little black, and a little more burnt umber. Notice that the tube of black is much smaller than the others, because a little black goes a long way. I started using a small brush on the first coat, but that seemed to take forever, and I ended up thinning the paint too much. After it dried, I used a 1-inch brush to mix and brush the paint. I'm using 70% IPA to somewhat thin the paint, but not too much. I wet my brush first with the IPA, then squeeze it out so it's barely damp. This is going to help in cleaning the brush when I'm done. I mix in just a touch of black, mix it with some of the white until I get a light gray color. Then I add a bit of burnt umber. I try not to mix them too much so I can get some variation in the colors. I continue along the peninsula as well as the shoreline. It may be a little dark, so I may have to lighten up, but that's all going to be covered anyways. In the last video, I suggested 3 methods to fix the 1/4 inch difference in height. The last way was to raise the water level. Many people said this was the easiest way to do it. I probably would agree that it would be the easiest way, but I don't think it was what I really wanted to do. I ruled out creating the slope path for the track as that didn't seem prototypical enough to me. Pictures of the area showed it to be pretty level, and then the apron would account for that. The first suggestion was to raise the ship and the apron level. As I was looking at various pictures of the area, I noticed that there was a seawall that jutted out just past the apron. It appeared to be part concrete and part wooden retaining walls with pilings. As I thought about that, it hit me that I could create concrete platforms for the wooden structure used to control the apron height. If you know what that thing is called, let me know. This wasn't too difficult as it turned out. I first carved a piece of foam to act as the retaining wall section. I cut pieces of balsa wood for the concrete portions on the front and sides, then used my wraps to create a sloped surface to the top of the seawall. I glued the pieces of balsa to the foam block. I then took 1/4 inch balsa wood and cut 2 concrete footings for the frame structure. One piece I made as long as the retaining wall. The other was just over the size of the base. You're probably not going to see these during a normal operating session as you'd have to really look down directly over the space, but it will raise up the pieces without having to do a lot of additional building. These shots here will give you an idea of what it's going to look like once it's assembled in place. I then coated the wood forms with the thin coat of drywall plaster. Once these dried, I lightly sanded the surface with 150 grit sandpaper, which left the surfaces fairly smooth with some imperfections that would indicate chipped concrete. Painting the concrete is kind of like painting the ground. What color is it? I used this picture to get a sense of the colors. I used my white, black, brown mix to paint these concrete forms. I may add some chalk powders or pan pastels later. These shots here show the colors that it turned out to be once painted. I think it turned out pretty good, although I may lighten it a bit a little later. Here I test assemble the pieces to give an idea of what it's going to look like with the ship and with the landing, and as well as the apron. Let me know what you think in the comments. Next step was to begin to lay out the track plan. I had to dig out my original plan out of the trash in order to locate where the switches were marked. After marking the location of the switches in the track by making small indents with a short nail, I was able to remove the template and dispose of it. I started laying out the track with the turnouts. The location of these is critical to the success of the rest of this module. There is a number 6 Pico switch that allows access to the storage tracks. It also acts as the lead to the ship. A Pico number 8 routes to the 2 spur tracks. I won't go into the details of how I cut each piece of track to fit, but I will provide some of the key actions I took to get this to lay properly. First, we're going to cut the rail. And to do this, I recommend you use the Xuron rail clip nippers. You'll thank me later. And you could use a cutoff wheel in a Dremel. I've done that before, but you need to be careful as the wheels can break and fly off and create some nasty injuries. Also, you need to make sure you're making a vertical cut in the rail, as it is easy to create an angled cut, which will ultimately need to be straightened out. In a pinch, you could also use a razor saw, although it takes a lot longer to use, as you can see. The switches, as I mentioned, are Pico, and the flex track is Atlas. I'm using Atlas rail joiners, and they can be a bit of a bear to get on the Pico rails. I start with these on the switches because they are harder to put on. I generally will try to slide these on first, but with Pico switches, they typically require a little bit of trimming of the material on the first tie. This will make room for the rail joiner. The rail joiners come in strips of 4. I'll start with the strip and place the first one onto the rail. When I cut the rail, I'll take a small file and I file the bottom of the rail smooth. I'll also file both sides of the rail to remove any burrs or rough spots that might prevent the rail joiner from going on. It sometimes takes some pushing, holding the joiner with some small pliers. But don't squeeze too hard, as you can squish the joiner and make it useless. One reason I start with the switches is because I want to make sure that the rails are straight coming out of the diverging tracks. While they look like they may be coming out curved, they really are straight. Once the joiners are on and the rail is straight, I solder the rail joiner to the flex track side of the track. Occasionally, I'll solder the rail joiner to the switch, but I try to avoid that as it's harder to remove those down the road should I decide to change or reuse them. For the track lead to the apron in the ship, I needed to define the proper alignment of the track. Normally, I would start from the switch and work my way towards the ship. However, in this case, I decided to work from the ship end first. I did this by adding the Y switch that will sit on the apron and joining it with 2 tracks from the ship. I had to work on the alignment a bit, but once I got the switch on the tracks, it looked great. This track is going to rest on the apron, and so I decided I would glue it to the apron now rather than risk bending the track or the joiners. I used light amounts of Aleene's glue to secure the switch to the apron. Now the ship and the apron are all one part. After that, I aligned the number 6 switch with the apron track, and after cutting to the appropriate length, I joined the pieces together. At this point, I soldered a small section of track to the number 6 switch on one end and to the end of the number 8 switch on the other end, making sure that it was coming straight off of the number 6. Then I connected the 2 pieces of flex track to the other end of the number 8 switch. I started to secure the track to the foam with small brads. Normally I would use caulk to secure the track, but I didn't have any, and this time I chose to use the nails. The final pieces of track required them to come out of the number 8 switch and gradually bend until they were parallel. I used a 24-inch metal straight edge and laid it on the peninsula. I lined up the ties on one side of the track to the straight edge. Starting from the right, I added nails to secure it, making sure that it was straight. And then I did the same for the second piece. In reviewing some photos, I noticed there were 2 buildings that I wanted to make sure were on the module. I'm not sure what each of these did. Maybe one of you can add some insight into that. But they were there on the and I wanted them on the module. Here are some quick looks at the pieces from one of the buildings that I've been working on. The pieces on the left are primed and ready for assembly. These were cut from wooden siding material, roughly of 9-inch planks. The windows are from a purchase I made years ago, and the packaging unfortunately doesn't have the name of the company on it. I don't have a door, so I'm going to need to scratch build one, but I think I'm going to model this with the door opened for some extra interest. Oh, and the other piece is part of the wooden seawall that I built out of wood. This will go on the side of the new section I build, as I mentioned earlier in the video. So I think I'm making pretty good progress so far. I still have a long way to go, but stay tuned as we continue to build this out on the next video. And until then, thanks for joining another 5-Minute Modeler.